Martha Beck. Every time you've come on this podcast, I just feel like it's rainbows and unicorns. I don't know what
We
else
have
to
good
say.
times. Yes, we do.
Is
Actually,
that,
unicorns are real. They're just really strong and they're called rhinoceroses. Actually, I stole that from Jenny Lawson.
oh my
But,
gosh.
I thought it just gives you a different image of unicorn, right?
Right? Right? I think you're a
Yeah.
unicorn. And ever since I met you, whenever I'm with you, I think thoughts that come out of my brain and my heart that I've never thought before. So that feels like a unicorn. Speaking of all of that, you wrote a new book, which I just wrote a book and I can't imagine writing another book. So I don't know
Uh-huh.
how you've now done this so many times, but you have.
Well, look, your book is really, really, really beautiful. And my book is like, I try hard. So,
Um,
gotta consider the quality.
you're just it's too much with the humility over here. But it's why people learn so much from you because they see themselves in you because you make yourself so seen and so relatable and so lovable. And love is the most relatable thing. And you're so loving. Okay, so your new book is called Beyond Anxiety.
Yeah.
And this this is something we all need because we need to get beyond our anxiety. And to finish the title, you say curiosity, creativity, and finding your life's purpose. I wouldn't have expected all those words to follow beyond anxiety, but you
I
have so much
know.
to say. So, first,
Oh.
let's talk about anxiety. How do you define that? And why the heck is that so central in our lives?
Anxiety is the constant low-level panic in which most of us live. It's a kind of what I say is it's like being haunted. Being afraid, like if you're driving and another car comes at you, that's real fear. There's a jolt of adrenaline. Whoa, you turn the wheel, hopefully mitigate the accident or get out of it. And then you're like, whoo, shaky for a minute, and then it's gone. That's fear. It's like being shot out of a cannon, and we all need it. But anxiety is like being haunted. You're just always nervous, always anxious. There are things to fear, and you're not really identifying what they're. You can't identify. Like, I don't know, like you could hear about a new disease this very day and start worrying about that. But it's not real and present in the room. Just this perpetual fear of something that you can't quite name, and it never goes away. And a lot of people that I had been coaching and a lot of my readers were suffering from it. It's going up astronomically all over the world. And I was like, why? So I decided to write about anxiety. But then it turns out there are lots of books about anxiety. The exciting thing to me was not when you get through your anxiety and bring yourself down into calm. No, I can do that when I meditate. Oh, bring it down. Now I'm calm. But if you can sustain that, it's what happens if you keep going beyond. And so, like, anxiety is the first third of this book. The second and third thirds are about what happens after your anxiety is gone, after you know what to do to get rid of it. And that was a complete surprise to me. And I enjoyed it very, very much.
Oh my goodness. First of all, it's very relieving to hear you say that it's this constant thing that everyone has, because I think that the secret we all have is we all have the same secret. And I
Yeah,
think we
no
all
kidding.
think we're the only people that have this. And I don't need you to name names, although you've worked with everyone and coached everyone, including Oprah. But it sounds to me like I'm sort of getting the I message that everybody has anxiety. And it's kind of a relief to find out that that's a little bit universal, although terrible. I don't wish it on
Yeah,
anyone.
terrible. And what a relief.
So you do find that everybody has some degree of that.
Everybody, I don't think my son has any anxiety. He's got Down syndrome. He's not very verbal. And I don't think he's ever anxious. I've met two people I believe are enlightened. They're never anxious. Um, since I did all this research and started using the stuff that I recommend, I haven't been anxious. I was anxious for 60 years. Then I wrote this book and now I'm not anxious anymore.
Oh my gosh.
But anxiety it is a huge problem all over the world, and it is rising at an astronomical rate. It went up 25% just during the pandemic. And here's the thing about anxiety in ourselves, in our society, once it starts going up, it doesn't by itself ever go down again. It only goes up. And that has to do with the working of the brain. And that's what I studied for that first third of the book. And I'd be happy to talk about it if
Yeah.
if it's not boring.
No, I was going to say, can you tell us what the heck is happening in the mind, and what causes it to sort of become from a little whisper to a flurry to a blizzard that sort of takes root?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we all evolved with a little part of our brains called the amygdala that is its job. It's very ancient. Anything with a spine has an amygdala as well, or something really close to it. And its whole job is to look at the environment and figure out if something is dangerous or not. And so it looks at something, and it likes to bet heavily on danger. So if you see anything that's unusual, you will have this jolt of fear from your amygdala. You'll release these fear hormones. Now, in most animals, it's like, oh, I see something, I'm scared. Oh, okay, it's just my spouse. Ah, okay. And the fear goes down. Or, oh, I heard something very scary. Oh, that was something falling down, and now it's fallen. It's not going to threaten me anymore. My fear goes down. In those cases, we might react like animals. The fear clears itself in about 90 seconds. But what humans do that no other animal does is we tell stories inside our brains. And what happens in anxiety is that the amygdala goes, whoa, and we get this little jolt of fear. But instead of letting it go back down, the other parts of the brain, and they're all on the left hemisphere, they grab that feeling of fear, and then they tell a story to justify why they're afraid. And we might people are afraid of flying, and you can say it's very safe, like it's safer than driving, you'll be fine. And they're like, yeah, but I'm not gonna. And they've got a story in their heads about sitting in a plane helpless to do anything as it plummets 35,000 feet to the ground, and they are justifiably terrified, even though that has never happened to them, and the odds against it happening are astronomically huge. If they get on a plane, that story of the plummet into the ocean or whatever is going to run, and it actually creates the belief in the brain that that's happening. So when we tell ourselves stories or imagine bad things happening, it goes back to the amygdala, and it reads to the amygdala like the actual environment. So you're on a plane, everything's fine, people are snoring around you, but you've got a story that the plane is crashing, and your brain doesn't see the people snoring and the safety record and all that stuff. It sees the plunge to your death. And so it reacts again. Oh, and then the brain is like, oh shit, things are worse than I thought. Now it's on fire, and my loved ones will pine away. And the story gets bigger and bigger because it keeps coming back to the amygdala, which boosts it. So it tells a bigger story, which boosts the amygdala more, and it starts to go into what I call the anxiety spiral. And it goes up and up and up. And because we aren't present enough to disbelieve our own frightening stories, we become victims of our own intelligence, and we live in hell even when things aren't bad at all.
Oh my gosh. I only laughed in the beginning because it was a little bit like a stand-up routine when you were like, oh, it's not a tiger, it's just my spouse. I posted something on Instagram, it was like a repost. It said something like, every night my ice maker says, do you want to hear my impersonation of someone breaking into your house? Because I'm always like, what is that? It's just the ice, So I'm like laughing at myself because I can hear some of the ridiculousness that comes through my own mind on a daily basis. And then the second half of what you said is just so not funny. It's so upsetting because, my rabbi once said to me that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yep.
And so much of the suffering that happens in that space that you just so beautifully shared. And so what the heck do we do about it? Number one, sometimes you don't even know you're in it. You're so unconscious. You're so in the unconscious, you can't even pull yourself out of it.
Oh yeah, you think it's real.
So what would be the possible way to start becoming at least more aware, number one? And then number two, once you are aware, when it feels like life or death, how could you possibly put your nervous system at ease when it's totally dysregulated?
You ask such wonderful questions. I have spent years and years and years as a coach helping people identify the thoughts that were frightening them and then gently question, is that really happening now? Like, people would say, I'm afraid of cancer. Okay, me too. I'm really afraid of cancer. All right. But if somebody is lying awake at night all night, afraid of cancer, then that's destroying their quality of life,
Yeah.
whether even though they don't have cancer yet. If you've heard, have you read Anita Moorjani's Dying to Be Myself? She
What a
was,
beautiful title.
yeah, Anita Moorjani, she grew up in Singapore. She had all these different cultural influences on her, but she grew up terrified of cancer. Her whole life, she was like, she wouldn't drink out of plastic bottles. She would only eat,
Ugh.
absolutely organic living food and everything. And it was all about cancer, 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 cancer. Well, then in her 40s, she got cancer. And she did all the Chinese treatments and all the Indian Ayurvedic treatments and all the Western medicine treatments. And she fought this thing for years and nothing helped. And she was finally, after 4 years of horrible suffering, she was down to like 85 pounds. She was emaciated. Her body was like a skeleton covered with tumors. That's all it was. She couldn't even hold up her head. And she finally went into her final coma. And they were trying to keep her alive long enough for her brother to fly in and say goodbye. And she went into a near-death experience. So her brainwave stopped and she found herself in a different space, a sort of different dimension. And her father and her friend, both of whom died of cancer, were there. And they came running up and she said it was like, she said, I'd spent my whole life in a huge warehouse full of beautiful, beautiful things. And I'd been looking at it all with a tiny little flashlight. And suddenly the floodlights were on. And I could see the magnificence of the universe and of our own being and of myself and everything. And her father said, okay, now you understand more about how to be, what you really are. This is not your time to die. You need to go back. And she was like, okay, into what body? And he was like, your body. And she's like, that is down for the count, Dad. I don't know if those were her exact words, but he said, no, you'll be fine. So I used to do this imitation of Anita Moorjani awakening from her death coma. And when I met her, my horrible, horrible partner told her about my imitation of her. And she told me that it was quite accurate. And this is it. Okay. I'm dead. I'll be fine. Okay. So that was, she woke up 3 days later, her tumors were half their former size. 9 days later, she was cancer free. And she has spent her life going around the world talking about how living in joy and abundance, as you so wonderfully write about, and seeing your own magnificence is a lot better than worrying about cancer. So she, in a weird way, her story is a story of anxiety. And what happened to her was a very dramatic and sudden shift away from all anxiety into presence. And in her case, it had a literally miraculous effect. But what actually happened is quite, it's very discernible, and it allows us to imitate that transformation from anxiety to no anxiety, from illness to health or whatever, without having to die of cancer. So whatever you're worried about, just notice everybody. I actually wanted everybody to just write down something that makes them anxious, just in the chat, just like in 3 or 4 words. Oh, someone's having postpartum issues. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm literally crying, but every time I've ever heard you speak, I'm crying and laughing. And I think the most alive people make you laugh and cry.
Oh, because I'm stealing all my material from more interesting folks.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. It's just so profound what you just said. And I'm going to let you comment because I think you want to comment on this chat, and then I'm going to say more things.
Okay, so I'm just looking, dental work. Making a presentation, driving and crossing the street with my 2-year-old. A lot of public speaking, ending up on the street. A lot of people are afraid of that. Cancer, running out of money, getting my voice out to the world, having enough money to retire. These are all things that are fairly extremely, actually, they're extremely common. So if you'll all think about the thing that makes you anxious, like imagine it happening until you start to get like anxious. Imagine, oh, looking at your bank account, there's not enough money. Oh no. All right, I have to cross the street, and okay, I have to go live on social media and I don't know what to do. Whatever it is, get yourself nice and anxious. And then rate your anxiety from 0, which is no anxiety, to 10, which is maxed out panic, and just give it a number and pop it in the chat. Doesn't matter if you wrote down the other, 7. 9, 7, 9, 10. Wow, Marcy. Yikes. Sevens, a lot of sevens. This is good. I mean, it's not good. Of course, it's not good, but I'm thrilled that you're jumping in and playing with me, because I'm going to show you how this can change. Okay, 5, 6. We're getting the less anxious people, sort of moving more slowly than the anxious ones. Okay, this is good enough.
Oh my God.
Now, I want everyone to write into the chat. You've got your anxiety score going. I want you to write down 3 things you love to taste. Everybody, actually just pop in one, because there are a lot of us. Just pop in one thing that you love to taste. Chocolate, 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 bourbon, chocolate, chocolate, bourbon, dark chocolate, whipped cream bourbon, sushi bourbon, mint chocolate, wine chocolate, cinnamon chocolate, grapefruit, no, all kinds of things. Eggnog, good coffee, cinnamon, grapefruit, yummy, 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 yummy. Okay, now put in one thing that is not food that you love to smell. Flowers, roses, salt water, lavender, jasmine, roses, pine trees. Oh, I love those things. Ocean, rain, vanilla, campfire, lemon essential oil at the out of doors, a pumpkin candle, honeysuckle, beach, yum, rosemary, jasmine. Okay, this is wonderful. Now I want you to put in one thing you love to hear. Bird song, Kathy, music, baby laughing, toddler giggling. My kids laughing children are very big here. Ocean waves, my favorite music, my grandson's voice, the violin. Oh, this is great. Wind chimes. Okay, you know where I'm going with this. 3 things you love to touch with your skin. Grass, soft sheets, kids' fur, my cat's fur, rain, velvet, warm blanket, num, num, num. Furry pillows, barefoot dreams, baby's skin. Oh, so sweet. Water, sand, warm blanket. Okay. And finally, something you love to see. The sun, rainbows, babies, the ocean, sunset, sunrise, open spaces, tall trees, my children laughing. Now just notice Christmas lights, desert, mountain, jungle, smiles. Just notice that if you took this whole list, and I used to have people write 5 things, right? So they're going really, really into their senses, digging for, okay, what are my 5 favorite things to smell? And no matter how many I do, it always turns out that nothing on the list costs any money. Like virtually no money. You can smell a pumpkin candle without buying it, right? So that's the first thing I always note, is that money is not necessary for the things that give people real joy. Now, what I want you to do, each of you, put together in your mind a scene where all 5 of these things are present. So you are, you're listening to birdsong and the ocean, and you're eating chocolate and sipping your favorite red wine, and you're on the beach, you're in the jungle or the It's a jungle beach or it's a mountain beach. I don't care. It's a beach. There are your children laughing. You've got your dog in your lap or the cat or your horse or whatever you love to touch. The horse is not in your lap. That's ridiculous. Why would you even bring that up? Okay, but just make the whole thing. Drinking bourbon around a campfire in the grassy mountains with kids laughing, you are onto it. Okay. And really imagine the sensory experience of that scene. And just breathe it for a couple of breaths, like be there. And as you are there, not after, not popping out of this, but in the scene, how high is your anxiety? Put in a number. Ha ha! Nah, nah, nah. Mad science is true. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. How has this miracle been done? Do you know they used to treat anxiety in people who had really severe anxiety by shoving a screwdriver through their eye socket and just mixing it around in their brains, frontal lobotomy. That's the way psychiatry used to address people's anxiety. And it still wasn't perfect. And you just got to zero anxiety by imagining something you like to eat. Okay, we did not have to put a screwdriver in your freaking brain. We also didn't have to put in any additional anti-anxiety meds, though I highly recommend them. If you've got anxiety, use what it takes, right? You do not deserve to suffer that stuff. But what you just did is instead of going to the left side of your brain that tends to tell stories about fear and wanting to control everything and wanting to grasp things and keep hold on to them, what you did is you activated the part of your right hemisphere that it takes care of things like imagining something having to do with the senses or feeling and experiencing something with the senses. It has to do with creation of an imaginary scenario that can go any way you want. Now, there's also an imaginary scenario going on when you're anxious, but you don't know it's imaginary. You think it's real. The scene you just cooked up in your mind is every bit as real as your worst fear that you just wrote about. But I mean, you're just sitting in a chair, right? Like you're scared a lot. Most people don't think of positive scenarios, but you think of all these negative scenarios, or you could live in positive scenarios. Mainly, you're just going to be sitting in a chair somewhere, right? That's mainly what's going to happen to you. But the use of your imagination and the use of your brain, the skillful use of your brain to get out of the anxiety spiral and to begin using your creativity, that is what I discovered when I was doing this research, because the very structures that cause anxiety on the left hemisphere are mirrored in the right hemisphere structures that lead to creativity. So third of the book's about anxiety. Great, get to calm, but then 2/3 of it are about what goes on when you're beyond anxiety, when you start to create. And you can absolutely rewire your brain so that you end up creating joyful and beautiful things. And you don't need to go back to anxiety. Fear, yeah, sure. If a bear comes in, you're going to want your fear. That's just logical. But you don't need anxiety. It is not helping you. And its biggest lie is that it tells you it's keeping you safe.
It's awesome. It's such an awesome thing to literally practice that practice and to feel yourself just go into this Zen-like experience that you can conjure up. And you
Right?
said
So
something
quickly.
so quickly, and you said something at one point, you said this fear part of your brain that starts to control everything. And I think part of what I've experienced is that in the moments where I've really allowed myself tremendous joy, what winds up happening is I can feel myself having to like cross an ocean of surrender in order
Mm,
to experience the joy. And that first footstep over that ocean feels like tremendous vulnerability. And
mm,
and also maybe a little shame, like a little unworthiness. And then
mm,
there's the crossing over of of the letting go really of control. And on the
Mm,
other side is this feeling that everything was always in escrow, like the amount
mhm.
of love, the amount of joy. And
Yeah,
it's almost impossible. Like if I come once a year, I do a silent retreat for a week. And
yeah.
it's always very, very, very hard at the beginning. And when I
Mm,
come home, I feel so light as a feather that it's almost, there is no way that I can try to control things and have the amount of joy and peace that comes at
yeah,
the end of that retreat. So it
yeah.
feels like the word control is super important,
It
and
is.
the word surrender. And I think it's interesting because as a person who's been really invested in creativity my whole life, creativity comes through spontaneity. Like if you're trying to write the right song, you won't be able to write it.
Yeah,
But if you
yeah.
allow yourself to make something messy and play, the song will write itself through you. And so, can you speak more about why we're actually trying to control and how that control actually takes away our joy and our peace?
Okay, so this is part of the way the brain functions. The left hemisphere tries to keep you safe by controlling things, and sometimes it works fairly well. Like you can scream at someone not to hurt you, and maybe they'll back down. But we also try to control things like whether people love us or not, or whether we'll get sick, or whether we'll have enough money, and we try to control it for the rest of our lives and under every circumstance. And you just used the phrase, I have to let go of control. But actually, you never have to let go of control because you never have control. What you have to let go of is the illusion of control and the desperate attachment to controlling things, neither of which actually work. They don't work. We really don't control pretty much anything in the world. I remember after my son was born with Down syndrome, Um, and I knew about it for the last couple of months of the pregnancy, and I was just shattered. I was 25 years old. I was so miserable. I was getting my doctorate at Harvard, and I have this kid who has a profound disability. And I remember at 25 going, oh my God, I can't control anything. And people urged me to end the pregnancy, and I could have legally, just barely legally. I've helped other people who chose the other path and who did terminate, and I'm 100% on board with their choice. But I was already really attached to the baby, and I didn't want that option. And I was just like, and people would tell me, but yes, you could control how your child's life goes. And I was like, no, I can't. If he were born with an IQ of 183, I couldn't control his life into a happy place. I can't control any of my children's lives. Damn, this sucks. So for a while, it was like, yeah, what? I can't control anything. This is horrible. And then I thought, wait a second. If I could control all these other people and all these circumstances, how the hell would I keep track of it? Whoa, that is too much responsibility for me. I wouldn't do it right. I wouldn't have enough energy. And I was like, oh, maybe I could maybe I have been imagining that I am on an airplane and I am the only one who is bravely holding the airplane up in the air by pulling upward on the arms of my seat, right? We don't control, well, yes, we don't. So, yeah, I mean, we can control things like our bladders sometimes. These things are good. But to let go of control is not possible. There is only letting go of the illusion of control. And where do you land when you let go of the illusion of control? And also let go of all the stories in your head.
It's so beautiful. And I just wanted to say it because it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard anyone say. And you said it. And it was about probably 14 years ago. I heard you speak in San
Wow.
Francisco, and you were talking about your son and how you asked the doctor one question. And you said, I've figured out what question I need the answer to in order to have this baby. And the question was, will he feel joy? And the doctor said, yes. And you said, I'm having him.
Hmm.
It's like one of the most beautiful things anyone's ever said in the history of humanity. So,
Thank you, sweetie. You know, I think I was cutting corners because that wasn't a doctor. I got the call from the nurse practitioner at the Harvard Educational Health Services, and I picked up the phone, and it had been a really hard pregnancy. And she said, Martha, I have some not so good news for you. They'd done an amniocentesis. And a voice said, I remember I was standing in my apartment, I was looking at the wall that was smudged with smoke because the building had caught fire and all these.
Oh, geez.
So she said, I have some not so good news for you. And I felt that chill, that ice that you get when somebody tells you there's bad news. And in that space, I heard a very calm voice say, don't be afraid. And she said, the fetus you're carrying has trisomy 21, that's Down syndrome, blah, blah, blah. And the voice said, Martha, are you happy? And I was like, what? And I actually said it out loud, what? And the nurse thought I was talking to her, and she goes, all right, so Down syndrome is blah, blah, blah. And I said, not you. I was like, I was all rude about it. And I said, am I happy? I don't know. No, not really. I'm trying to be successful, but I don't even happy. What does that even mean? And I said to the nurse, I've heard that people with Down syndrome can be happy. And she said, I don't think so. And the voice said, that is right. And then I said, I'm having it. It wasn't even a person with a body.
Well, you said that he's a magician, and so
My son?
yeah.
Yeah, I think I wasn't as out with this stuff, but now I'm old and I don't mind if people think I'm crazy. So
Are you kidding? This is the thing that makes people seem so opposite of crazy. It's like we all know our biggest power is our capacity to perceive that which isn't three-dimensional. And so you're
woo.
so good at that. But it comes back to, you wrote a book. You've written many books that actually have this theme about joy. Joy really
Yeah.
seems to be your specialty. And
Mm.
you make me laugh so much because you give yourself full permission to live in a state of joy. Like you don't take anything that seriously because you're having too much fun. And so the second and third part of the book, what does that look like for you, that anxiety can turn into this joyful experience of creativity, and then
Yeah.
even more, your life's purpose? What on earth?
Yeah. It can act like a springboard because it's so wretched and miserable. Ultimately, we go, I don't want this. I want to get out of it. And if you're motivated to get out of it, what you can do is start to activate the part of the brain that is creative. And don't get scared because your creations have been judged ever since you started school. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But what I'm talking about is that literally, when the part of the brain that is anxious gets working and anxiety begins, we know from tons of research that creativity flatlines. Ironically, we put pressure on kids to be creative and on each other to be creative in a very judgmental, comparative way that comes from that controlling part of the brain. So it comes out of anxiety. Everything in that set of brain structures, it works on comparison and juxtaposition and ranking things. And it's great stuff if you're doing a science experiment. One of my favorite brain scientists, a guy named Ian McGilchrist from Oxford, he says the left hemisphere of the brain is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. So it's supposed to do things that serve our sense of meaning and purpose and joy, but instead we let it get control. And he says we function like people in our culture, we function like people who've had a right brain stroke and we're just living in the left hemisphere
Oh
of
my
our brain.
God.
So all this research shows that creativity or anxiety flatlines creativity. And I thought, wait a second, do they toggle? Does creativity flatline anxiety? You all just did it. You went into your creativity and you flatlined anxiety. This has nothing to do with drawing a picture and having someone put a ribbon on it or tell you you're bad, right? And do you know, in the 60s, NASA did a study to find creative geniuses so they could hire people to go to space or whatever. And they found that 2% of adults that they tested who were like highly educated ranked as creative geniuses. So they went along for a while, and then someone thought to give the same test to 4 and 5-year-olds.
Stop.
98% of them ranked as creative geniuses. And I think the other 2% were just having a bad day. We are creative geniuses. That is the gift humanity has been given, is this ability to create things that aren't there and then make them real. But we spend all our time just getting anxiety stories and pretending those are real and making them real. What a bummer. The way to liberate your genius is exactly what you just said. And it's how you work, and it's why these people love you, is to get in there and make a mess. I mean, I get up every morning and paint. This was an experiment I did. It was in the pandemic. I was like, oh my God, I think these toggle. I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to get up every morning and just activate the right side of my brain for a month. So I did, and I started drawing. And I thought, then I'll move on to other things. But I never moved on to anything else. I just started drawing like 20 hours a day, like couldn't sleep, full of joy. I felt so intoxicated. Like wow. And my anxiety dropped to 0. And it was after 60 years of continuous anxiety.
It's so awesome and fun to even just listen to. I've had Julia Cameron on the show a couple of times, and I asked her, she wrote this book called The Artist's Way for people who are familiar. And I said, do you really think everyone's an artist? And she said, have you been to a preschool and have you ever seen a child in a preschool classroom that doesn't love to paint and do things with their hands? And I said, that's a good point. And then she said, the difference is, and it's what you just said, that they're all willing to get paint up their nose. And then at the age of 7 or 9 or 12, somebody tells you something that feels like a rejection. And you say, oh, I know exactly what my strategy will be. I won't put anything in the world unless I can predict and control how it will be received. And then we turn off, so it's just
judgment, anxiety. How do I control this? Shut everything down. And what she's saying is just, it's hard because we live in a culture that is very anxiety dominated, and it's anxiogenic. It creates anxiety. So even if you can get to calm, which I was doing with meditation for years, we live in a society that spins us back into anxiety because one thing, attention is money in today's economy, and the best way to get someone's attention is to scare them. So people have a vested interest in scaring us, and then everybody's got this control thing, so we do it to children. There's one other study I have to tell y'all, because I know there's so much love for children that comes up in the chat. I love this. They do an experiment on creativity where they give people raw spaghetti, 1 marshmallow, a paper clip, a meter of masking tape, and a meter of string. And the job is make the tallest possible tower using these ingredients in like an hour. So they give this to a whole bunch of people, MBA students, CEOs of corporations, engineers, mathematicians, physicists, everybody. And you know who absolutely flattens the competition, like by almost unbelievable levels? 5-year-olds. And do you know why? Because the grown-ups are so busy jockeying for position and wondering if they're am I offending my boss? Or, I wouldn't presume. I mean, by the time, let's make a committee. We'll do some research on it. The 5-year-olds are just like, move, give me that. Okay, what is it? No, don't try that. Okay. And they're just like moving, and they're not worrying about being polite. And literally the other groups never built anything. And the 5-year-olds are building these, like, it's the Eiffel Tower in spaghetti. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I've been saying lately that the thing that I think it's true is that your brain is so afraid. So what it wants is certainty. So the opposite of fear can't be certainty. It's infinite possibility. And all of that goes along with what you're saying, because in order to experience infinite possibility, you have to let go of control, which you never had, the illusion of it, perfectly said. And the messiness is what leads you to whatever is beyond what you could have ever tried to predict. It's in the unpredictable. And I
Yeah.
mean, that's why like Will Ferrell is so funny, because he didn't even know what he was about to just say,
Right.
right? Like the spontaneity is the capacity to be messy, but that really is the thing out of everything anyone ever tells me is the hardest thing for them. It's
Ah,
that. So is that, what is that? How do you
I
overcome
have
that?
instructions. First of all, when you say the brain wants control, you're actually only talking about the left side of your brain.
Okay,
But since
fair.
that's the only part that really talks, I'll stipulate that. The right
Okay.
side of your brain only uses language for jokes, poems, and song lyrics. Okay. So there is a crossover, but it's not very much. So the right side of your brain is all about spontaneity and joy and making a mess and connecting things and enjoying things. And what you have to do to go from one to the other, this method, I remember it with the acronym CAT, K-A-T. K is for kindness. The way to get your anxiety down to manageable limits is to start being kind to it. So I talk to so many people who are like, how to fight your anxiety. I need to end my anxiety. I've got to bring it down. I hate being anxious. I want it to go away. So if you came into my house and you were terrified, and I came running at you and said, I'm going to end you. I'm going to finish you. I hate you and I want you out. How calm would that make you?
Not so.
And yet that's how we go after our anxiety. But our anxiety is not an enemy, it's a frightened animal. It's not a machine, the way a lot of psychiatry has tended to treat it. It is a being. And everyone instinctively knows how to calm a frightened animal. If you opened your door and there was a miserable, freezing little kitten or puppy or bunny on your doorstep, would you run at it and like poke it with a screwdriver in the eye? Would you scream at it that you wanted to end it? No. What would you do? Tell me. How do you be kind to a small animal?
Have compassion and be super warm and just gentle and offer it food and shelter.
Yeah, people are putting this in the chat. Talk gently. Bring your voice down. Scoop it up, hold it, be nurturing, soothe it with a kind tone. One of the people I've referenced a lot in this book is an FBI hostage negotiator. This guy is going in to places where terrorists literally have guns to the heads of their hostages. And you know what he recommends? Gentle, soft, empathetic kindness, where you see the terrorist's point of view and you really listen and you talk to them the way you would talk to a frightened animal, because that's what they are. Is it fair that you treat them kindly when they are being evil? The right hemisphere doesn't even care. It just wants everyone to be safe, right? So we know how to be gentle. You're all give it a blanket. Chris Voss, yes, that's his name. Ooh, Sherry knows Chris Voss. She said, I've listened to his book 7 times. I think I've done it 10 times, Sherry. And it's so weird that this He-Man from the He-Manist kind of thing is talking the
Yeah.
way a bunch of women here are talking about scooping up a bunny. So kindness to the self.
Wow.
The part of you that is afraid, just say, honey, I hear you. Tell me everything. Sit down with the journal and say to the anxious part of yourself, you're good here. I got you a cup of tea. I've got you a blanket. We have 15 minutes. Let me hear it. What's going on for you? And it may not even say anything because it is subverbal. But if you let it write things down just for 15 minutes, research shows that you will have incredible increases in your well-being for weeks and weeks to come, just if you do this for 15 minutes. Okay, kindness brings down the inflammation of the fear. After kindness, K, comes A, and that is art. And I mean making anything, a sandwich, a dinner party, a new way to paint your toenails, anything, a mess, just all of it, art and artifice require the use of the right hemisphere, which toggles with anxiety and shuts it down. You guys just did that. You were doing art when you imagine the things you love to sense and then imagine that they were there. That's art. That's all you need to do.
Beautiful.
And then the T just happens by itself. And it stands for transcendence.
Mm.
And you can't control it, and you don't know what it's going to say. And that's what Will Ferrell and you and other people who live in their right hemispheres are dancing with all the time. There's no controlling it, but you can really, really indulge in the playful, sensory, creative parts of your life. Whatever really turns you on, what you love to do, just do it. Give yourself time, give yourself space, even if it's just 15 minutes a day. And what happens is that the anxiety spiral on the left hemisphere is really, it gets tighter and tighter until you just can't move. But on the other side, there's a spiral I call the creativity spiral that gets bigger and bigger and bigger
Wow.
and more connected. It makes connections. The right side of your brain is actually slightly paler than the left side because it has these long white neurons that are bringing things together that you've never brought together before. And that is the process of creativity. And as it connects and connects and connects, you start to feel connected to the entire universe. And that's when you start having synchronicities and ideas you don't know where they came from, and performing better than you know how to perform. But it doesn't matter. It's just for the joy of it. Yeah. So
Oh
that's
my
how you get to
gosh.
transcendence,
It's
kind of
so, go ahead.
transcendence.
It's so mesmerizing, and it's giving me so much nourishment because it's putting science and language and words to something that I've been really curious about. Because people will ask me, so are you the kind of person that, like, meditate every day for an hour and then you're very present and still? And I'm like, I don't think of myself as being still at all. Although I do meditate a little bit in the morning, but it's really quick. And I find that it's interesting, some of the studies that I've seen, when you meditate, actually, as opposed to your brain slowing down, it goes into gamma, which means it speeds up really, really quickly.
Some of it does.
And
Other things go dark.
well, see, this is why when you're talking to a person who's this many degrees, you have to really know what you're saying. You need charts and things like this. But what I find fascinating about all of this that I'm experiencing is that the times where I'm actually the most joyful is not when I'm sitting still, but I'm moving so quickly because I'm not trying to overthink or predict anything. It's literally like being Jackson Pollock and just throwing things at the wall. Like, those are the most fun moments. And so I've often wrestled with, well, I don't understand. I'm trying to teach people this idea of like stillness and presence. And yet there's this thing about speed. And it's like, in this creativity, when you're in flow state, it's happening so quickly that there's a joy in that, because it's like bigger than you. It's like you move beyond time. It's like a quantum space.
Yeah, the edge where you go beyond what you're doing deliberately and start to experience things being done through you. In China, they call it Wei Wu Wei. In Taoism, they talk about that when nothing is done, nothing remains undone. And the place between those two, where you're doing it deliberately and where you don't quite know how it's happening, is called flow. And you've heard about that your whole life. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi found that the happiest we ever are is when we're in this state of flow, and it's at the outside edge of our ability level for something. So if I'm skiing, I had my brain mapped years and years ago, and they found all this anxiety stuff going on, and they said, just sit there and bring it down. We don't know how, but just do it. And I thought about all the calming thoughts I could think. Didn't work. And then I started thinking about skiing, which I enjoy, and my anxiety waves went down. And then I started thinking about skiing in a blizzard with no visibility, and it went down further. And then I began thinking about skiing on the edge of a cliff in a blizzard with no visibility, and I had zero anxiety at that point. The reason is, when you're working on all cylinders, you're absolutely flat out. You are so present. And it's when you're absolutely present that this transcendence takes you away. And I actually, when I decided I was going to start meditating more than an hour at a time, I had horrible anxiety for like 4 months, every day, an hour and a half of just mounting anxiety. And then One day I got to the edge of my ability level and I found a space in there, and I just thought the word stillness and then went into this incredibly deep place. And it was literally like I'd shifted into a different world, and it was so exquisite. And I just stayed there for an hour, and it was absolutely magical. So I started doing this every day outside in the forest. I was living in the forest. And one day these turkeys were going by. I opened my eyes, and there was this flock of wild turkeys going by. And I was like, oh, turkeys, man. And as I looked at them, I swear to God, the turkeys froze like they were playing a game of statue. And they just stopped moving. I was like, this is bizarre. And then I thought, how many are there? And I started to count, left side of the brain. And they all went, wah! Like they came out of the trance and started moving again. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. But I was really into the stillness. So I was like, stillness, shoo. I went in, maybe half an hour later, I opened my eyes again. All 17 of those turkeys were lying flat on the ground
No
with
way.
their heads like stretched out. And they don't even sleep like that. They just don't do this. And I still don't understand what was actually happening. But I will tell you that if you can be kind to the part of yourself that is anxious, and if you can then give yourself the freedom to just mess around with what makes you happy, if you can put that in the front and center of your life instead of the margins where the money culture has put all that stuff, right? First is money and productivity. And in the margins, you can have a hobby or meditation. If you put that first for a while, you not only feel better, you experience the world as incredibly magical, and it responds to you differently. And I want everyone to experience that.
Who doesn't want 17 turkeys lined up in front of them on the
Yeah,
ground?
wild turkeys, no
Yeah,
less.
you're gonna go
Yeah.
get that tomorrow. That's
Somebody
her
told me,
purpose.
somebody told me they do that when the females do that when they want to mate. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, I guess they
um,
were very attracted to me.
so the last thing that you share in this book, and you're sort of leading us to it, is finding your purpose. Is that what you're saying? Is that our life's purpose, is to be in a state of play and making messy art?
Not exactly.
Okay.
A thing, once you get to the level where you don't quite understand how it's happening, and I know you're there, what happens then is there's a theologian who said your mission in life is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet.
Mm.
So what happens is you're just having fun, making stuff, hanging out with your friends, because making a party, this gathering is art. You made art. This, by showing up here, you became part of an artist's creation, this beautiful meeting. So when you get to that place and you're just making stuff for the fun of it, for the joy of it, you start to notice that you get great joy out of meeting some kind of hunger that other people or other beings have. And as you start directing, not even really directing, but just noticing that you are moving toward this thing that gives you deep gladness and meets the world's deep hunger, you're like, oh, that's why I'm alive. That'll do. And that's your purpose.
I love that so much. I have to tell you this just because you're such a sprite, and I feel like you'll love this story, even though some of the people on this call have probably heard me share this. But my dad passed away in July, and we went through hospice, which was absolutely mesmerizing and gorgeous, even though it's terrible. It's so beautiful and heartbreaking and heart opening. And then we went through funeral and sitting Shiva. And then about 2 weeks went by after that. And my sweet kids had been sort of really like bummed out for 5 weeks in the summer. So my husband said, are you ready to go back out in the world? There's a movie called The Minions, whatever, Despicable Me 17, whatever it was. You want to go? I said, sure. I said, fine, let's go. And we went out into the world, and the cars drove so fast. And I thought, don't people know my dad died? Why are you driving so quickly? You know that feeling?
Yes, I know
And then
that.
we went to this restaurant, and I remembered that the joy I always have is just loving somebody for no reason. It always makes me happy. So we're sitting next to this couple, and I thought they were on their first date because I could hear them, because it's one of those hole in the wall sushi places where you're all like squished together. And I said, "Are
Uh-huh.
you guys on your first date?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I go, "I'm going to buy you dessert." My kids were like half excited and half like, "Oh my God, my 13-year-old, so embarrassing, Mom." My 8-year-old's like, "Mom, that's so cute. Which dessert?" So I get them dessert, and the woman says, "What's your phone number? I want to say thank you." I'm like, "Fine." And we just exchange numbers, and I leave. And she texts me 2 hours later, and she said, "Thank you so much for the dessert." And I said, "Oh my gosh, you're so welcome." And I said, "Is there going to be a second date?" And she said, "I'm not sure, but he's really sweet." She said, "But what I wanted to tell you," she said, "I'm a widow, and this is the first time that I've gone out since my husband died 5 years ago." And she said, "I felt like there was something in you giving me that dessert that my husband and God gave me a green light." And I said, "Well, what's crazy is I did that because I needed to love someone because
Yeah.
it made me feel better because my dad died on July 3rd." And she said,
Wow.
"Oh, my husband died on July 3rd, 5 years ago." And
Oh my God.
I'm telling
So,
you that, like you just said, we've been told that the only things that are worth our time are making money and being productive. And there is no amount of money or achievement or award that you could have given me to substitute for how magical I felt the universe was when she told me that. And if I sat here with you until tomorrow morning, I could tell you lists of those stories that have happened in my life, and they make
yeah,
life so magical and meaningful and
yeah.
purposeful and amazing. And I just had to tell you that because you're such a beautiful Tinkerbell soul, and I just knew that would make you happy.
Well, that's life beyond anxiety. Like, anxiety is so boring when you look back and see that, right? Like, from that place to look back and see that you were all crunched up in a fear space when there you're in this huge dance of consciousness and love, and and all beings are reaching out to you in material form, but they're also spiritual, and you're connected with the whole universe as well as being in one little body. And that is the miracle of our existence, and the reason I think our souls are in this to begin with. Not to be anxious, anyone can do that, but to be beyond all of that in the magic space.
I love that you have been given such a gift to put words to reality as it actually is.
Mm. Back
And
at you.
it's so incredibly kind. Um, I have no doubt that you will just keep giving people the doorway through the looking glass. Through the looking glass you go. And
Yeah,
then it's just it's all been there all along. What a
it's
gift that
right there.
you wrote another book, and it's coming out in, well, I don't know when this is going to air, whenever you want us to air it. But for those of you who are here, it's coming out in a few weeks. Tell everybody where they can pre-order your book.
Oh yeah, there's always Amazon, and then there are you can go to your independent bookstore, order it there.
Can I tell you something? You are so easy to love.
Ah,
You're so lovable. It's like watching I don't know, it's like the Nutcracker or something. It's like this, it's like, because every time you say something, everything's firing. It's whimsical, it's silly, it's so deep, and it's so smart, and it's all together in this one
oh,
delicious, it's like an
thank
everything
you.
bagel. It's like yummy. So anyway, thank you
Thank
for,
you so much. I
you're the
love what you're
best.
doing. I love this community. The spirit here is amazing, and your work is such an incredible gift to the world, Kathy. Thank you. Thank you.
I love you. I love you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Go buy her book. Pre-orders help, even though she doesn't need it. She's a best-selling author, but buy the book, buy the book. I love
Mm.
you. Bye, everybody.